3-inch floppy. Hope nobody found that. When I started, we used punch cards. And my most memorable story of punch cards was one night I was working very late at night, and the only key punch machine that was accessible in the computer center was broken, and I wanted desperately to finish a program that I was working on. So I literally had to take a punch card out and put a piece of Scotch tape over the holes so that I would create a different pattern of characters to solve my problem, and literally created a new hole with a little knife and cut my program on it. I started the medical school in Winnipeg, which was in the center of the city, away from the university campus. And my first job was to put in what's called a remote job entry system, which is basically a glorified card reader and printer that would read cards in the medical school and transmit them over the phone lines to the computer center. I just confirmed with the person who hired me, Dr. Barry Hodgson, who I mentioned last night, that it was one of the first non-military applications of this technology in North America. I didn't realize we were that far. I knew we were quite advanced in Canada. And I can remember the time when the telephone company brought in 25 men, all men, of course, in those days, brought in 25 men to explain to them what was happening. This new technology was sending digital data over analog telephone lines. So, at the medical school, we then upgraded our computer system and put in a real computer, a mini computer, a 16-bit little mini computer. And you want to guess how much memory we had in that computer? 8K. I do remember coming home a year or so later, and Dad said, "Why are you so excited?" I said, "We've just been allowed to double our memory." So that was just, it was a highlight. It was 16K of memory. Okay, looking back over the years, the 60s and 70s, we moved from manual to data processing. When I started in this field, the term was data processing. And some of the students will remember my lectures that I still think we made a big mistake not keeping that word data processing. Probably in some ways would be better off if we did. But those were the days when computers were large, bulky, expensive, so individual organizations were discouraged from having computers, and instead organizations such as the Manitoba Hospital Association, the universities, and places like that were the ones that had computers. And if the computer was available, it was generally being used for financial systems in those early days. Just began to see the start of laboratory systems. This is our first, with the help of Betsy Humphreys from the National Library of Medicine, the chief librarian there. She was able to help me find one of the first references to the use of computers in medicine and healthcare. And it talks about an electronic brain that went into the Michigan Hospital Service in 1956. Some of our history here, I won't go through it all, but it's just to give you some sense of where we've come from. And Mike Bainbridge, I thought, gave us a wonderful sense of how things have changed over the years. The 1959 was the first time that the word punch card was put into the National Library of Medicine's Index Medicus. And in 1960, they added the word automated data processing, and there were 15 citations in the National Library of Medicine in 1960. 62 was also the first year we got our first international journal in the field, Methods of Information in Medicine, in Germany, was launched. And in 63, there was a report that 7% of American hospitals used automated data processing equipment. And I suspect at that time primarily for financial systems, payroll systems, and general ledger. Moving on, the early 60s, by 65, which was interesting because it's a little, still, in 65, there were only 40 citations in the National Library of Medicine's index use of computers. 69, our first academic program in the world, in Germany, under Peter Reichertz, who was one of our our true grandfathers in the field. He started the program in Hanover. Jochen went to that program, and then 3 years later, Jochen started his program at Heidelberg in Heilbronn. And we were also later fortunate to be able to attract him to move from Germany to Canada. 69 was ARPANET. How many people are familiar with ARPANET? Some of the older folks the older ones will remember ARPANET. ARPANET was the beginning of the internet. In those days, it was a military network. It started as a military network, and I can recall being excited when I finally got an account. It expanded from the military to universities. Initially, universities that did research with the American defense system, and then they started slowly expanding it to other universities. And I can remember when we finally at the University of Manitoba, we got access to ARPANET, which was still being referred to as ARPANET in those days. 64, and this is now some sites of Canadians, pioneers in our field. The Hospital Medical Records Institute started in Toronto, and that was the forerunner to what we now know as CIHI. And that was an abstracting service where instead of sending their data, I can remember my father worked in the hospital commission in Alberta, and he talked about Canadian data going to Michigan to be processed, because that was the only place that they could process abstract data in the 60s. Finally, in 64, we started doing it in Canada, and the Hospital Medical Records Institute was there. 65, SNOP, Standard Nomenclature of Pathology, was created and started to be used by the pathologists in North America, and then gradually spread around the world. And what many people perhaps don't realize is that SNOMED grew out of SNOP, and it grew out because of the efforts of Dr. Roger Cote from Sherbrooke, Canadian, who devoted 15 or 20 years of his life to creating SNOMED. And we have him to thank for that. We started the Computer Department of Health Sciences in 1967. The early 70s was our first indication of the term. Medical informatics was not a term in use. The only place it was being used was in Europe, basically in Germany and in France. It was not a term in North America. We were discouraged from using the term because it was too technical and too targeted. But Dr. Peter Reichers was the first to really define the field, so to speak. However, we also had in those early days a very visionary Canadian by the name of Dr. Shires, David Shires, in Halifax. And David was involved early on in the technology and produced this little book, which I still have a copy of. And he was the first one to make the distinction between medical information science, which he defined as supporting the curing and prevention of disease, and health information science. Now this is 1974, so I suspect I forgot to confirm with the people who started the program before I even arrived, at least created the program before I arrived, that they used David's book, because they chose the terms health information science back in the mid-70s. I didn't. So I suspect David's book was probably one of the factors there. We also have this famous quote, which looks very modern, very contemporary, still very, and of course it comes from a 1974 document, about our Canadian healthcare system. And we used that, some of the students will remember, used that quote and said, where did that happen? And of course, most would say, well, fairly recent, obviously, because it's still the case. It was back in 74. So moving on into the childhood years, as I call them, we went through an interesting period of time where data processing was no longer in vogue. It was considered passé, so we started talking about computing systems. And we went through an era where everything now was a computing system as opposed to electronic data processing. We started to finally see major hospitals, just the big hospitals, start to introduce computers, and primarily in the financial area, although we started to see laboratory systems become a little more common in that period of time. The laboratory systems were a logical place for computers to start, because the payroll systems can process data in a fairly routine, regular, well-defined way, and those high volumes. And computers were useful for that. 1974, our first international meeting in Amsterdam. And John Anderson from England played a key part in that. He was another one of our early pioneers, and I think a wonderful meeting with him in London, and getting some insights from him when we started the school. 1975, we formed Coach, which is the new logo. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a copy of the old logo, which was red and white. And that's the motley crew that started Coach. We created the word coach in the dining room of our home in Winnipeg, where we were having a meeting. And we went through all sorts of acronyms. I wish I brought them up because some of them were fascinating acronyms. We ended up with Coach, and we ended up choosing white and red as our corporate colors because Marie Barrett, the lady on the right there, was wearing a red suit with white polka dots. And then, of course, Steve Husen, who was the driving force and the inspiration behind Coach. 76, we had our first national conference in Ottawa. And as I prepared this, I began to realize that we as Canadians were right up there. We're at the forefront. We were doing a lot of things first before many other parts of the world. And it didn't really sink into me until I started working on this. Those were the days where there was a period of time in the 70s where vendors were not appreciated. And vendors were on the dark side, and we literally did not invite any vendors to the first conference in 1976. It was only anyone but a vendor. Times have changed. Thankfully, times have changed. We sponsored our first international conference in Toronto in 1977. The World Congress Medical Informatics was now become MedInfo. And we didn't see the formation of our first international body until 79 when India was formed. Moving on, we entered another stage in life, and we made a big mistake, and we went from computing systems to information systems. We entered the stage, and in fact there are publications and books which had the equation that said data plus computers equals information. Big mistake, big mistake. But we had to become more sophisticated, so we dropped computing systems and we moved to management information systems. We started to see clinical systems finally begin to appear, and Meditech became a very early developer and still a common, probably the most widely used clinical information system in Canada right now, and in the United States too, began to show its place and started to be used. We also began having our semantic challenges, and when we moved to information systems, we moved to a variety of kinds of information systems, and we had the beginnings of what I call our semantic challenge industry, where we're always using different terms. We started the school in '81. I was at the Jubilee Hospital, and fortunate to have been teaching a graduate course in management information systems at the School of Public Administration in the evenings. And I won't bore you with the details, but eventually I was asked to start the school. We started as a program, this is a school. We didn't get school status until we managed to get going here and get through some very difficult financial times. So some of you know we were one meeting away from being eliminated in 1983 and 4. It's the economic downturn. And BC was suffering, as most of Canada was suffering from the economic downturn, and the government wanted blood on the table. It showed that the university was sacrificing, we were the sacrificial land, and we were one meeting away from being taken away. Unfortunately, Murray Fraser, the Vice President of Academic, agreed to one more one more year.